Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently we are in Judges, not Exodus, but Judges chapter 14. Last time we got into the birth of Samson. Samson is, I say, arguably the most powerful and most notable judge in the book of Judges. Okay, 4 chapters is kind of devoted to him, translating a big chunk of it to his life, what he did, what he stands for. Now, obviously, there are other notable judges: Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah. These are all notable judges, but without a doubt, Samson would be one of the most, certainly the mightiest that God will use. And God had said that he was to be a Nazarite, meaning he would carry the vow of the Nazarite all his life. He could not drink wine. He could not drink beer. He could not eat fruit from the vine, anything that produces, wine or beer, okay? And he could not cut his hair. All right. So, for the most part, Samson will do that. He will not drink wine. It's going to be the other things that he does that will get him in trouble. All right, so let's get into it. Judges chapter 14. And it says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman there. He went back and told his father and his mother, I have seen a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as a wife. Now, big problem with this, and we're going to see this kind of behavior with Samuel. And sometimes it's going to look like it's kind of excused by God. I want to say right off, it's not that it is excused by God, but you have to kind of look at it from, given what he has to deal with, okay? And this is kind of important because there is this notion from a lot of Christians that in order for God, we'll put it this way, let's look at it this way, that God is so holy he cannot look upon sin. And that's not true. God looks upon sin all the time. And there's a lot of layers there if you say, how close does sin actually touch God? Well, obviously it doesn't at all. But how God deals with, and remember, everyone in the world is sinful. So during this period of time in Judges, everyone really wasn't doing what God wanted them to do. So to keep that in mind, so when we see like Samson's behavior, we're in this period of time, Israel was so off course from God that it's just unbelievable. So one of the first things that he's going to marry a Philistine woman, which he should not be doing. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we have to look at it from this perspective that God is going to use man's wickedness, his weakness, his failures to his glory. Okay? So that it doesn't mean that God excuses it, but this is what all he has. In other words, if God had to use holy vessels, man would be doomed because there are none, in the sense that there is no one righteous, there is no one good. We're all sinful. All right, let's see here. Oh, verse 2. Verse 2. He went. Verse 3 is where I'm at. He said, but his father and mother said to him, Can't you find a young woman among your relatives or among any of your people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistine for a wife? Now, their question was valid. Their question was true. But Samson told his father, get her for me because I want her. Now, that phrase will be Samson's undoing, living by his flesh, living by his debased nature. Verse 4, now his father and mother did not know this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion against the Philistines, and at the time the Philistines were ruling over Israel. Now again, I want to keep this in mind, that while on the one hand you have God using this occasion, right, to judge. Remember, we've seen this in a couple of studies back, where God with Abimelech. Remember Shechem and Abimelech. God uses Abimelech, who killed his 70 brothers, to take out judgment against Shechem, and then God judges Abimelech. Remember, a woman throws a millstone on his head and crushes his head. Both were wrong, both were evil, and God uses the occasion to judge both. And this is what we're seeing right here. God is using Samson's sinfulness, and this is important to understand. He's using Samson's sinfulness. At the same time, he's judging the Philistines, who are far more wicked. Okay? And at the same time, remember, they were brutally oppressing Israel as well. Verse 5, Samson went down to Timnah with his father and his mother, and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Suddenly a young lion came roaring at him. The Spirit of the Lord took control of him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went and spoke to the woman, because Samson wanted her. After some time, when he returned to get her, he left the road to see the lion's carcass, and there was a swarm of bees with honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it as he went along. And when he returned to his father and his mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had scooped the honey from a lion's carcass. Samson is a trip, okay? One of the things that was certainly a no-no was you could not come in contact with a dead carcass. Let alone, think about it, the grossness of it. This is a dead carcass that bees had made a nest, and then honey from it. He scoops from it. But we also see, of course, this power that he has, where he just shreds this lion. Verse 8. Verse 10. His father went to visit the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. When the Philistines saw him, they brought 30 men to accompany him. Let me tell you a riddle, Samson said to them. If you can explain it to me during the 7 days of the feast and figure it out, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 exchanges of clothing. But if you can't explain it to me, you must give me 30 linen of garments and 30 changes of clothing. Tell us your riddle, they replied. Let's hear it. So Samson said to them, out of the eater comes something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. After 3 days, they were unable to explain the riddle. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we'll burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? So Samson's wife came to him weeping and said, you hate me and don't love me. You told my people the riddle, but haven't explained it to me. Look, he said, I haven't even explained it to my father or my mother, so why should I explain it to you? So she wept the whole 7 days of the feast, At the last, on the seventh day, he explained it to her because she had nagged him so much. And then she explained it to her people. And on the seventh day before the sun set, the men of the city said to him, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" So he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my young cow," now the old King James said heifer, right? "If you had not plowed with my young cow or heifer, you wouldn't have known my riddle." Now this is a foreshadowing here of what is to come, the tragic events that will come. That his weakness towards women, to violate, right, standards, to violate God's standard. So think about this. All it took was his wife to just nag him, right, pull upon his emotional strings, and she got him to tell the secret. So this is a foreshadowing, of course, when he comes across Delilah. Okay. So he says, verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord took control of him and went down to Ashkelon, and he killed 30 of their men. He stripped them and gave their clothes to those who had explained his riddle. Enraged, Samson returned to his father's house, and his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. All right. Let's go to chapter 15. So later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a gift to visit his wife. "I want to go to my wife in her room," he said, but her father would not let him enter. "I was assured you hated her," his father said, "so I gave her to one of the men who accompanied you. Isn't her younger sister more beautiful than she? Why not take her instead?" Verse 3, Samson said to him, "This time I won't be responsible when I harm the Philistines." So he went out and caught 300 foxes. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each of the pair of tails. Then he ignited the torches and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the pile of the grain and the standing grain as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Then the Philistines asked, "Who did this?" And they were told it was Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because he has taken Samson's wife and given her to another man. So the Philistines went to her and her fathers and burned them to death. So, kind of hard right there. But keep this in mind. These were Philistines. Okay, these were Philistines. In other words, what we consider as unequally yoked, these were unequally yoked. Verse 7, then Samson told them, "Because you did this, I swear that I won't rest until I've taken vengeance on you." And he tore them limb from limb with a great slaughter, and he went down and stayed in a cave at the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up, camped in Judah, and raided Lehi. So the men of Judah said, "Why have you attacked us?" They replied, "We have come to arrest Samson and pay him back for what he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the cave at the rock of Etam, and they asked Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" "I have done to them what they have done to me," he answered. They said to him, "We have come to arrest you and to hand you over to the Philistines." Then Samson told them, "Swear to me that you yourselves won't kill me." "No," they said, "we won't kill you, but we will tie you up securely and hand you over to them." So they tied him up with 2 new ropes and led him away from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came to meet him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord took control of him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like burnt flax, and the bonds fell off his wrists. he found the jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, I will pile them in a heap, and with the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. And when he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone and named the place Ramath Lehi. And he became very thirsty, and he called out to the Lord, have you accomplished this great victory through your servant? Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? So God split a hollow place in the ground at Lehi, and the water came out of it. After Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. And this is why, and that is why he named the place Hakor, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Now, what also became something more was that he was a pain in the butt to the Philistines. Okay, that he, when it says that he judged Israel, that means he kept having these campaigns against Israel. You know what? I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to stop here, and I'll pick it up with chapter 16 in our next study, because that chapter there is going to be the entire chapter of Samson and Delilah, the whole Samson and Delilah story. One of the things that I think is important, though, as I said, I'm going to kind of remind us as we move through this. We see God's grace, how he uses what is so beneath his own standards, God's standards. And as I said, he doesn't have any, all men, all flesh is grass, we're all wicked, there's none good. Now, I guess our takeaway from this, from Samson, will be, and we will see this, Samson takes a lot of chances with sin. I think that's kind of interesting. He takes a lot of chances with sin, and that's going to catch up with him. If we don't learn anything about Samson, if you don't, I'll walk away from this, is that it never wins. You never win. To think I can tempt this, live this life in the flesh. And as we see, Samson gave into his flesh a lot. Now, on the other hand, God used him mightily. What this also shows us is that we don't have to be giants or mature spiritual giants or people of great maturity for God to use us. And we'll see this in the next chapter, where the tragic end of Samson's life because of his failing, that, you know, the wages of sin is always death. And we'll get to that. All right, guys, in chapter 16, the next study. I'll see you then.